Hello, YouTube viewers and such. Um, haven't really had as many ideals as making videos, just speaking off the cuff sort of stuff, but I have been writing some posts and reading and I thought I'd just maybe do some kind of scroll through the doomer pages on Reddit, the collapse subreddit, and well, I actually wrote a post there, but there's stuff on climate change and disasters and population growth and yeah, so maybe I'll just scroll through and see what's on the page. At the top it says rainwater is no longer safe to drink anywhere on Earth, scientists say. Euronews.com. There's been much research into rainwater from all over the world, and has been found to contain levels of forever chemicals, PFAS chemicals, I suppose they're referring to, above the guidelines which are deemed safe. This is related to collapse because even though in many first world countries we don't drink rainwater, many other countries do, and this will be a global precedent into the future of water collection. I used to believe that global civilization could disappear and some random uncontacted tribe somewhere would go on with their lives without even knowing the outside world existed. And now it seems like they'll suffer from cancers and birth defects that they will have no way of explaining without realizing that everything they touch has been contaminated. Stop worrying and learn to love the cancer. See if there's any knowledgeable comments. I never fully think about that there will be levels of suffering in years ahead. Let's go back. Iraq boils and dangerous 120-degree heat as power grid shuts down, from the Seattle Times. Stupid computer. Submission statement. This is an example of extreme weather events caused by climate change triggering systemic collapse. Energy failures in the grid has caused industries to rely on additional sources of power, diesel generators, causing further knock-on effects of higher energy prices and additional pollution. As predicted by many authors on the subject, the first examples of these systemic breakdowns will happen in places like Iraq that are already strained by extreme weather patterns. The note about the fishing agriculture failures is particularly worrisome. Iraq is already suffering from an intense water drought. This is very bad. Seems like one of the worst places to live in the world is Iraq. Nothing but war and disaster since 1991. It's still dangerous to underestimate dry heat. You don't realize how much water you lose because it's not coming out through your skin through sweat, therefore trying to cool the body down. Your body tries to retain as much water as possible in a dry heat, and becoming dehydrated arises because the water inside you is trying to keep you cool from the inside rather than the outside. I come from the U.S. and live in a desert region. People always underestimate the dry heat and always say it's not as bad as wet humidity heat. Both types have their dangers. There's always deaths related to heat stroke, heat exhaustion every year where I live. Under both types of heat waves, it's best to stay as safe, cool, and hydrated as possible. It's hard in places without AC, but it can be done. Giraffes, parrots, and oak trees among many species facing extinction. Climate reality is hitting us like a breakaway glacier. Ha, ha, ha. Drought. 50%, 58% of human infectious diseases can be worsened by climate change. State legislatures are torching democracy. I really like this post because it gets to the point about overpopulation and this whole eco-fascism accusation. Eco-fascism is a cheap and stupid accusation to prevent honest discussion about overpopulation and its role in collapse. Every time someone brings up the devastating effects of overpopulation on humanity and the planet and its rolling collapse, many people will get foam before their mouth and scream, "Eco-fascism," and claim that we are far from being overpopulated and that you want to kill billions of people and whatever. Please stop this nonsense. Number one, it is an undeniable fact that we are overpopulated. Humanity has needed 200,000 years to get from 10,000 humans to 1 billion in 1810. Then we needed just 210 years to get from 1 billion to 8 billion. The massive population is consuming too much resources and causing too much pollution. If everyone lived like an American, we would need 5 Earths. If everyone lived like the average citizen of Indonesia, we would still need 1.1 Earths. There's an article linked called How Many Earths, How Many Countries? Earth Overshoot Day. The problem is that even if we live like the average Indonesian, we would still need to reduce our living standard consumption even further because world population is still increasing. Expected to hit 10 billion by 2050 to accommodate 10 billion people. To accommodate 10 billion people, we would have to reduce our living standard to the level of Afghanistan or medieval peasants. Modern agriculture in the form of the Green Revolution was the only way we could have fed 7 to 8 billion people temporarily, because the Green Revolution was and is based on cheap fossil fuels. These are running out. On top of having reached peak oil, we have also reached peak water, peak farmland, and peak artificial fertilizer. Namely nitrogen and phosphorus. The former uses natural gas, and we're seeing some results of what a shortage of natural gas is leading to in terms of fertilizer with this sanctions on Russia and countries that are dependent on this natural gas for their nitrogen-based fertilizer, which also produces the greenhouse gas in the process, nitrous oxide, which is actually some 200 times more of the heating effect than CO2. We don't release as much nitrous oxide as we do CO2 and methane, but I have to read further the actual levels of how much are we emitting in relation each of the greenhouse gases. Usually only hear about CO2 and methane though. The only way how we could somehow prevent or at least minimize the effects of collapse is to reduce the population. This in turn would cause less resource consumption, less agriculture, less fossil fuel consumption, less pollution, less everything. This is only possible when people accept that we are overpopulated, accept that it's not bad pointing that out, and accept that there are non-violent ways to reduce the population. So please stop this eco-fascism nonsense. It is harmful and presents a solution to something that is the main cause of collapse. Because if we increase our numbers further, the future will indeed be dire, with billions of people dying of starvation. During the Paris Climate Conference, the UN published a study that claimed that a 4°C warmer world would only be able to support about 1 billion people. It was then presented as an unlikely and extreme outcome of global warming. Right now, the climate is warming at a rate of 1°C every 25 years, which is accelerating and without tipping points. Which would mean a global temperature of at least 4°C warmer by 2100. I don't think they're including tipping points in this calculation. Keep in mind that your 1 billion figure is if everything is functioning optimally within the bounds of climate change. Lots of people facing starvation and death will tear apart infrastructure for even the merest chance at survival. They will burn this world to the ground in an attempt to survive, reducing our civilization's carrying capacity even further. So 1 billion with 4°C by 2100? Shockingly optimistic. I would not be surprised if it was more like 500 million or less. OP's original list of limits doesn't include topsoil depletion, destruction. Most industrial farmland will lose it in as little as 60 years, and depletion and contamination of freshwater supplies, including aquifers, exacerbated by shifts in rainfall patterns and desertification, as we are now seeing in all the world's Mediterranean climates. Overpopulation is a state where the environment can't support the population. Agree, but humanity made a Faustian bargain with fossil fuels to sidestep the resources available in finite ecosystems. Where formerly the planet could only sustain 2 billion people, industrial agriculture was able to expand the population to 8 billion, and it continues to feed the global population. Now we know that fossil fuels are poisoning the biosphere and causing climate change, but if we stop, billions will starve. Fossil fuel civilization is ending, though, and we'll soon find ourselves back to relying on local ecosystems to feed many more billions than they ever did before. And this time, we'll have to do this without artificial fertilizer or cheap methods of mechanized tillage, irrigation, harvest, and global distribution. Which I don't think will work. Anyway. My own comment to that post was, why is it that many leftists and those who would identify strongly with feminist ideals or feminism would deny, downplay, and brush aside overpopulation, particularly higher populations in the poorer countries of the world with the highest total birth rates, fertility rates, whatever you want to say, everything is fine, so just let the patriarchal, ultra-religious cultures of Somalia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nigeria, and elsewhere continue suppressing rights and disempowering women in these nations and forcing them into the roles of mere breeding machines and broodmares. Seems like this state of affairs, this encouraging or apathetic resignation to unbridled surging population growth, is actually beneficial to the capitalist class and corporations because it creates more fresh individuals to be exploited for low pay in the sweatshops, mines, manufacturing plants, etc. An abundant supply of grist for the mill to be utilized for offshore production, whose labor can be devalued in part by the sheer numbers and additional competition for desperate employment. Why exactly, from the point of self-interest, would the wealthy and the fascist want depopulation? The system depends on an ever-growing number of human chattel to perpetuate the economic Ponzi scheme. Then there's the fact that whenever someone says it's all overconsumption from the greedy materialistic West, and that the US, EU, China, Canada, Russia, Australia, and so on are responsible for the majority of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions and general environmental destruction, they neglect that all the third world, less developed countries want this exact lifestyle and are striving to attain the same levels of per capita consumption, which necessarily means more fossil fuel burning, more forest clearing, more urbanization, more private car ownership, and even further acceleration of extraction and depletion of non-renewable resources. And, yeah. You always just called Malthusian too, or something, and somehow that word has come to mean you want to kill people through famine or wars and attrition and actually, that was the consequence. These negative checks or negative feedbacks were going to happen if the population keeps growing and outstripping food supply. That was what Malthus was saying, not we need to kill everyone. He was talking about preventing the population growth in the first place. And yeah, so there seems to be some kind of misunderstanding of the term Malthusian these days. But I guess I'll just read the post I wrote, which was like a week before that post that I just read, and I posted this on some other groups. I just called it, I just made the title the first sentence, which is coronavirus is only a blip, a minor cold compared to the horrors coming down the pike in future years for our civilization. I did get 126 upvotes. If that means anything. Nothing is being done to curb or reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it appears, or deforestation, or depletion of marine life from the ocean. I could have added ocean acidification, or methane release from the thawing permafrost in shallow seas in the Arctic. A rise of 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial averages, what the IPCC warns must be avoided, may be baked into the climactic cake through thermal inertia in ocean heat content, or accounting for the multiple positively reinforcing feedback loops and irreversible tipping points being triggered. People are starving now, drought spreads now, but who cares? As long as there's plenty of dead animal flesh on the supermarket shelves in the first world, football games to watch, everything will plunder onward until all ecological limitations are crossed, until habitat loss for Homo sapiens can no longer be kept suppressed by material stimulations within the techno-capitalist, growth-obsessed superstructure or organism of civilization, modern society. Theoretically, we could possibly come together in internationally combined efforts of the brightest engineers and scientists to work on carbon drawdown sequestration technology, negative emissions techniques which work to uptake the excess carbon, which the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, includes as a must in their best case scenario pathways. There are, however, logistical and energy-based constraints that point to these direct air carbon capture plants, like the one built in Iceland, being unfeasible, way too expensive in energy terms, and only removing a negligible pittance of CO2. What is it, like 0.00 seconds worth of CO2? Also of unparalleled strategic importance is trying to drastically curb our out-of-control, unsustainable population growth, which theoretically could lead to drastically enhanced living standards and equitable distributions of wealth and material sources more than any implementation of progressive tax rate within a single country. It seems dubious that voluntary, more libertarian means through female empowerment and wide availability of diverse contraceptive methods, including elective affordable abortion, will suffice to regulate the rapacious blind urges of many humans. The world's mainstream religions continue promoting an anthropocentric, human supremacist view of planetary life that applauds uncontrolled reproduction and patriarchy. Politicians, business leaders, and single-minded, specialized neoclassical economists insist there aren't enough births and per capita consumption / general affluence can rise and rise, absurdly promoting and promulgating a false delusional notion that birth rates are going down is the crisis that confronts us. Women without children, child-free by choice, are still stigmatized even in the liberalized, secular societies where traditional hypernatalist religions are on the decline. More authoritarian, undemocratic means concerning the control of population, similar to the one-child policy China introduced in the 70s, or that of Singapore, may seem to be a draconian violation of individual liberty, the presupposed inalienable right to procreate with no semblance of responsibility required. But I believe continuing with the presently accepted unrestrained freedom in this particular domain will lead to far worse total aggravated suffering resulting from catastrophic systems collapse, which naturally includes billions dying in grotesque, drawn-out ways, with dystopian deprivation and ferocious madness for the pitiful survivors. To me, from all the gatherable evidence, we should not be encouraging or congratulating throwing more babies/children who cannot give consent into this veritable hell pit. In my humble opinion, might as well be classified as perhaps unintentional child abuse and cruelty, at the very least negligible homicide. Some may say that this is all a problem of unequal distribution in capitalist economics, with total aggregate human numbers being nothing impactful. While well-meaning and altruistic in motivation and intent, I do not think those who use this impassioned defense have thought of the long-term sustainability, logistics, scalability, and other hindrances to this proposed global operation of planet-wide food distribution, the spreading of our excesses and would-be waste. For one thing, there is all the fossil fuels necessary for even more cargo ships or planes for the transportation to undertake this delivery, and the question of refrigeration for preservation across the oceans. I also do not see how a socialist revolution, an overthrow of the capitalist model of production relations and elimination of billionaires through some maximum income law by itself would solve somewhat underreported critical ecological geologic constraints and limitations such as erosion of topsoil, of which estimates say could be gone in 60 years' time, the depletion of groundwater from aquifers/freshwater availability, the ubiquitous use of nitrogen fertilizers for our agricultural system, which relies on natural gas as a feedstock for the Haber-Bosch process, and peak phosphorus, the other critical fertilizer element that comes from the mining of finite, non-renewable phosphate rock, with 3/4 of its production coming from one location, that is the Sahel region of Morocco, and most of the rest from China. It is forecasted that 5 billion humans will face water scarcity by 2050, which is based on the business as usual projections and assumptions that the population will reach 10 billion at that time, the majority from an already desertification-prone sub-Saharan Africa. It is important to note that even if we could feed and house everybody today at this temporary moment, this is nothing about the long-term indefinite sustainability of this colossal action. That being said, I have no hopeful illusions regarding the politically incorrect, abhorred recommendations of erring on the side of caution and quasi-consequentialist preventative measures to avert worst-case outcomes in favor of more harmonious equilibrium and harm reduction, to be given serious deliberation by our equally deluded leaders who simply serve this biosphere-eating machine that essentially depends on ever-increasing numbers to perpetuate deleterious economic activity. Maybe I'll just leave it at that. And, yeah. So that was me reading some older posts.